Hey there, thanks for tuning in, and I'm here with Lars again. Thanks so much, Lars, for joining me.
Hey.
We are just continuing our series on Hellenistic astrology, and now we are going to be talking about the divisions of zodiac signs, and the first of it will be Decans. Decans first appeared in the text of Valens, if I'm not wrong, or maybe Dorothes. I have not read any.
I think maybe the oldest source of the Decans is actually from Marcus Manilius's
Yeah.
Astronomica, but he uses a different system of decadence. It's more like a harmonic chart. In other words, like an actual division by 3.
Okay.
It's not a symbolical division. But we'll talk about their origins a bit. I'm not an expert, but I know a little bit. So.
It's to me, I kind of got exposed to Decana and Vedic astrology, and that's my first experience. And that is one of the divisional charts that we use in Vedic astrology. So similarly, I think I've seen it in Valens's text, and I think Formicus Metanus deals with it even more extensively than Valens. Valens deals a lot with bounds, but I think Metanus does it extensively with Decans. So
a little bit more, yeah.
So
let me do a screen share, and we'll have some stuff to look at. Wrong thing. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Gosh. All right. Okay. Yeah. So this is from I think this is from Chris Brennan's website. Again, it's free online, so we're just gonna use it. And as you can see, the decans are just a division of each sign by 3, so they're each 10 degrees. So that gives us 36 decans, and we've got the rulership scheme. There's a few different rulership schemes. I'm not going to talk about Manilius's because I don't know as much about it, but there's basically the scheme that became widely used in India and also became the foundation for modern Western astrologers' use of the decans, and that is different from this. And what that is basically that, like, the sign, you take the sign, and then the first part of it is ruled by the same sign. So it's like Aries, and then you go to the next in the triplicity. So you go to Leo, which is the next fire sign, and you'll get Leo. And then you go to the next fire sign, you'll get Sagittarius. And then likewise in Leo, we'd have Leo first, then Sagittarius, then Aries. So that's kind of the more common scheme. And, that might be attributed to Varaharamira. I'm not totally sure the exact origin of it, but I learned him as Varaharamira's.
Yeah, Varahamira gives first picture about decans, or the 3 divisions of zodiac sign. But it might even be earlier, but still we don't have the text to prove that.
And it probably is earlier, yeah.
Yeah, and Yavana Jataka also has extensive work of decans, which I use as my base material for decans. Yeah.
And Yavana Jataka has a different rulership scheme as well. It's rather strange. It's like derived from the 11th and like 10th lord relative to the sign, something like that. But we're going to focus on these decans today, this scheme, which is kind of strange, but seems to work well in practice, which is the most important thing about techniques in astrology. If you can utilize it well in practice and you resonate with it and so on, then you should use it and you'll do better readings instead of worrying about if it's theoretically correct or not according to X scholar or X text or something like that. So this rulership scheme comes from what's widely known as the Chaldean order of the planets, which is based largely upon planetary speed. And that is, the order is like this. It's Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. So we start with the slowest planet and move to the quickest planet. And incidentally, the Chaldean rulerships, or the Chaldean scheme, is used in a wide variety of techniques, and it also has a basis in other elements of astronomy, not just planetary speed. But that's something for another time. I actually have a couple videos on my YouTube where I talk about that, for instance. Anyway, so for whatever reason, it starts with Mars instead of starting with like Saturn. Okay, so it just starts with Mars, and then it follows that same schema. And so every time we get to Mars, we'll repeat the schema, you know? And so interestingly enough, it also ends with Mars. It kind of ends, you know, awkwardly or incompletely in a sense. It doesn't quite complete this last circuit, you could say. So there's some oblongness to it. But another interesting thing is that really, like, the order repeats almost exactly, or pretty much exactly, right, when we get to Mars Decan in Scorpio. So what we get is, and this is really the only time this happens in the scheme, we get Mars, Sun, Venus, and going around in Aries, the first Mars ruled sign, and then we get Mars, Sun, Venus, and then following in the same order in the second Mars ruled sign. So in a sense, you really only have to memorize the decanates for this first 7 signs, and then basically you just apply the same thing to the next 6 signs, and you will be able to easily remember them and so on. Or if you get lost, right, you can always just awkwardly count on your fingers or something like that. You know, you're trying to figure out what the second decan of Cancer is. Well, you can, you know, start all the way here and just go around the Chaldean order till you get to Cancer if you really had to. But it's probably faster to just look at a chart like we're doing now. So that's kind of the rulership scheme of the decans that was most popularly used in like it seems like Hellenistic and Persian, Arabic, and European systems of astrology. So that's kind of what we'll be working with. And we'll talk about the origins of them as well a little bit. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
I think it's pretty much how everyone uses it currently. I don't know if anyone uses a different set of rulership schemes when it comes to decans. Okay, cool. So I really wanted to hear about the interpretation part, because the thing about decans and any other like division of zodiac signs is like the interpretation part becomes a bit more hidden. So not many people know how to interpret how a particular placement of a planet is getting influenced by being placed in a particular decan. Okay, sure. Maybe just real quick, I could just talk about the history first, though. Okay, sure. Cool. So, historically speaking, the decanates are somewhat of a mystery. They seem to be widely attributed to the Egyptians. And although, you know, they might be older than that, and they arguably were based upon like certain stars and star clusters. So it's likely that they were, in a sense, like a early system of lunar mansions, in a sense, or an alternative system to the 27-28 scheme that we usually find. So we have, in a sense, like 36 lunar mansions with the decanates, but over time they just became standardized to 10 degrees each, and then eventually to the tropical zodiac or to any zodiac. Just like any of the other mansions became sort of standardized because they were not originally equal in their division. Even in the Vedas, they're not equal in their division. So it's kind of interesting to consider that, but I find they do work well in a tropical zodiac, irrespective of the star patterns. And then there was some talk too of that the Egyptians, there's some evidence that there were maybe Egyptian texts or references or something where they were even trying to they had to periodically like recalculate what stars were in which decanates, which would seem to imply that maybe at some point there was a shift to a tropical framework of some kind, and that's why they were doing that. So I think we don't really fully know the origin of the decans and whatnot, and there's lots of interesting things out there about the decans, but they are a great tool. And so, yeah, now I'll talk about the interpretation of them, and we'll get into like
the images as well a little bit, and a few different uses for them, I suppose. But the first thing is like the decadents are not necessarily a heavily popular thing in a lot of the Hellenistic tradition. They're in like a few texts here and there, like this one, which is the text of Firmicus Maternus, which is a slightly later text than some other more foundational texts, but still pretty early, like probably 4th century CE or so.
Yeah.
But in any case, the decadents are kind of like a, kind of like an afterthought in a way, because typically Hellenistic authors place the most importance on the bounds, on the signs, and on the exaltations. And we'll do another video on bounds, obviously. But the decadents are kind of strange. So, let's see what Firmicus has to say about them, and I think we'll be pleasantly surprised here. So, each sign is divided into 3 parts, and each part has 1 decan, so that in each sign there are 3 decans, each having 10 degrees of 30, and over those 10 degrees it exercises its power and control. They have infinite power and freedom in indicating the fates of men. So at least from Firmicus's perspective, they're extremely powerful and important, right? You don't want to ignore that 10-degree segment. And this gives us some insight, too, into the way Hellenistics used divisions. They didn't create new charts out of the divisions, but the divisions were instead embedded in the chart itself. So it is different for a person having, the ascendant in the first decadent of Virgo and a person having the ascendant in the second decadent of Virgo. From this perspective, it is very different. And in Yavana Jataka, which is like kind of in a way a bridge text between Hellenistic and Indian astrology, you do not only find an image associated with each decan, but you also find characterological descriptions given for each decan when it's rising. You have like you have the type of body, you have the type of character and stuff. So the decans, again, they have infinite power and freedom in indicating the fates of men. So we shouldn't underestimate the decans. Okay. So in addition, the decans themselves are allotted to individual planets, like I just explained, right? So that if the planet should be in that decan, even though it is in a strange sign, is considered as if it were in its own sign. Located in its own decan, it accomplishes the same things as when it was in its own sign.
That's great.
This is very important, because in the later medieval tradition, decans were regarded as a fairly weak form of essential dignity. However, I don't think there's any reason for this myself, While Firmicus himself gives more importance to the bounds than the decans, he's still giving a large amount of importance to the decans. So while a planet in its own decan may not be quite as strong as a planet in its own bounds, domicile, or exaltation, the idea that it's weak was a later development. And so as practitioners, we have to decide what makes more sense to us. And in my experience, I do regard it as really significant if a planet is in its own decan. And I regard it as being fairly empowered. And this seems to work in practice. I can think of at least one friend who has the sun in the first decadent of Virgo, which is ruled by the sun. And in my experience, this fits well with this person in terms of like their solar characteristics. They actually have a stronger degree of independence and self-confidence than a lot of other people I know. So that is just like one small example. Of course, we're not gonna make a decision off of one small example that I've given you, but that's I try to use them more the way Firmicus mentions them. So that's the first thing.
Yeah, even I've seen a similar experience myself personally, because I use a similar pattern by using the Drekana chart, and whatever is there in my Drekana chart with regards to my siblings is almost perfect.
Almost perfect.
Yeah,
okay.
which is basically why I'm sticking to decans.
Okay, cool. And yeah, here we have a chart that's just showing it from a sign perspective, right? And actually, this is interesting because I think this is the one that Manilius uses. So I'm not totally sure why this is in here. We might find out later. But see, Manilius just puts, it starts with Aries and then it just follows the order of the signs and then repeats. And what that form of decadent does is that gives you a harmonic chart, a division by 3, like a real division by 3, so that any planets that would be, I guess, trine one another would in fact be conjunct, which doesn't happen in other forms, in all forms of divisional charts, only in the ones that are harmonic, meaning that the sequence of 12 just keeps going and repeats itself. So in other words, if two planets, if one is in the second decadent of Aries and the other is in the second decadent of Leo, that they are in a sense conjunct by this measurement. So that's a slightly different form of it. Anyway, he's giving the other rulership here, so the one I gave in the beginning of the video. So I don't know where this other chart comes from. It's not the same chart. Anyway, some who wish to elaborate in this in more detail add 3 divinities to each to every decan, which they call munifices, that is liturgi, so that for every sign 9 munifices can be found, and every decan is divided into 3 munifices. So this is basically one of the only references, maybe the only reference we have to a Navamsha style chart from a Hellenistic text, from a non-Indian text. Because later on we do get ninth parts and things like that in like some of the Persian texts and European texts, but they always are saying 9th parts of the Indians, attributing it to the Indian astrologers. So here though we don't see that. So I don't really know where this comes from. It's very mysterious, but it's very fascinating. Reading on, he says, again, the 9 munifices, which they say are allotted to every sign, they divide into an infinite number of powers of divinities. By these, they say, are decreed sudden accidents, pain, sicknesses, chills, fevers, and everything that happens unexpectedly. Through these divinities, they say defective births are produced among men. But this part of the doctrine we must of necessity pass over in this book. The Greeks also, who tried to reach the secrets of that theory, stopped at the first stage and left the subject with a certain reluctance. But now we must return to the doctrine where we left it. So again, this is very mysterious stuff, and Yavana Jataka is perhaps the first text where we find a super in-depth treatment of the Navamshas and what they mean and how they function with regard to the fates of men. We don't find the Navamshas in the Hellenistic texts, which are not necessarily Greek, by the way, but he's calling them the Greeks. So it's odd. It's on some level, maybe there's like a missing link here, right? There's like a sense of the Indians discovered something that maybe the Hellenistics or the Greeks got frustrated with.
Maybe. Yeah, see, there is a lot of missing links everywhere in history of astrology. So it's very difficult to actually venture into that area. So we'll leave that to the historians.
Yeah, we'll leave it to the historians. But I think the point is that what we get from this little passage is fairly unique in terms of what I've read on the Decans in older texts, because it's affording quite a lot of power to them. And the interesting thing about the Decans too is that there's a set of images for each one in the Yavana Jataka, but then there's like 6 or 7 other image sets and they're all slightly different from one another. So you have one in the Liber Hermetis, you have one in Brihat Jataka, you have them in the Picatrix, in Ibn Ezra's text in the late Middle Ages, and you have even a couple more probably that I'm not as familiar with. And so they're all slightly different. And so the decanates came to be heavily utilized in like astrological magic and talismanic construction and things like that. And at some point, the decans sort of became kind of more solar in character. Like they started being associated by some of the magical texts later on with the sun instead of the moon. So it was kind of like the decanates became the mansions of the sun, while the lunar mansions remained the mansions of the moon. And that's an interesting later development. And I'm just mentioning all of this for completeness. So, as far as interpreting them, it's really just like, it's pretty much if a planet's in its own decadent, you want to pay attention to that. It's going to be empowered. If a planet is in the decadent of another planet, then that decadent, the lord of that decadent, and even the image associated with that decadent will still influence the things that planet signifies. And where the planetary lord becomes most useful is during the Middle Ages. There were techniques developed where, like, basically you would look. This is a very, very cool set of techniques. You would look at least 5 lords potentially, and potentially more. But you'd look at the domicile lord, the exaltation lord, the triplicity lord, the bound lord, and then the decadent lord. And basically it was kind of like this idea that if the first one was afflicted, you looked at the next one.
Yeah.
If that one was afflicted, you looked at the next one. So if all of the lords of that sign are afflicted, or that degree position are afflicted, or are somehow maybe not seeing, they're in aversion, they're turned away. By the time you get to the decadent lord, right, the decadent lord might be the one that's in the best condition, and might be the one that can sort of offer the most assistance. And at that point, what's up?
Savior.
Yeah. And at that point, it's weaker than if it were like the domicile or exaltation lord, according to the medieval astrologers. And I think there's some truth to that. But what's interesting is that, like, again, observing these dignities and stuff, especially with like lots and points and planets too. If, like, let's say you had I'll just take the lots. Let's say you had the lot of fortune, and let's say the only lord of its degree position was the decadent lord. And I'll just make up a fictitious placement. Let's say it's at 1 degrees of Libra, since I just know that in my head. So we would look at Venus, we would look at Saturn, then we would look at Saturn again because he's the bound lord, right? Let's say it's a night chart, so Mercury's the triplicity lord. We'd look at Mercury, and then we'd look at the moon, which is the decadent lord of that first decan of Libra, I think. Yeah, it is. And so if the moon was the one making the closest and most powerful aspect by degree to that lot, right, then regardless of what condition the moon is in, the moon actually might have the most influence over that lot of fortune. And, if the moon is in good condition, then it can also provide a certain level of stability to what that lot signifies, especially if the other planets are turned away. But Robert Zoller, who mostly practiced like a medieval form of astrology, talked extensively about this and utilized this technique heavily and found very good results with it. And I mean, he said basically that it's so fascinating that basically with all these divisions and stuff, all of these planets via these divisions are influencing a particular point all the time, in a sense, right, to greater and lesser degrees. So basically decadence and the planetary lords of decadence can help give they can help us find additional influences on that planet or point or whatever we're looking at that we may have not realized before. And then, of course, we have other things too that we'll discuss in other videos. We even have the kind of elusive monomoria, which are a planet ruling each and every degree.
Yeah,
which is a fascinating thing, and which could also be used as a powerful form of dignity. There's no reason it can't be. Just because it's by degree or whatever doesn't make it somehow less significant. But I think the Hellenistic authors were less concerned with like a hierarchy and a pointing system of any kind, and they were just more concerned with like seeing how things layered on top of one another. And so that's how they might use the decadence.
Okay. I just had one question. Like, let's say, how do you find the actual dignity of a lord when it is placed in a decan? Do you look at the lordship of the decan, like decan lord, or you would just see the general general benefic and malefic nature of the decan lord? So how do you interpret? So let's say there surely is a difference between Venus in Saturn's decan, or like
Yes. Right.
okay, so or Venus in its own decan.
Well, basically, I would do a similar thing to what Valens does with the bounds, and that is he kind of combines the decan, like the nature of the decan, with the sign and the planet. So, in other words, like the decan of Jupiter in Pisces is going to be much more auspicious than the decanate of Jupiter in Capricorn, because Jupiter falls there.
Yeah.
And even Saturn's decanance in Pisces Saturn's decanate in Sagittarius is going to be more auspicious than his decan in maybe Leo, or even his decan in Pisces, and so on. Just by the typical rules of astrology, we can deduce this. So what I would say is that, like, yes, the decans are like malefic and benefic in a sense, but I think it's more important to. Well, no, it's not more important. Like, each decan has a characteristic that's based on a combination of the planet ruling it and the sign the decan falls in. So you wanna look at that, like I was just saying. But it's also important to just see the Lord of the decanate itself too, and if it's in good condition and so on. When you're starting to kind of get a little bit more into the subtleties of it. But just for a general overview, yeah, some decans are just naturally going to be more challenging, and some are going to be more benefic, and so on, based upon that combination of planet and sign. And one more thing I wanted to mention too before I forget is the decans are also really significant because we have decanates for the luminaries. So we don't have bounds for the luminaries, right? We don't have bounds for the luminaries. So in my opinion, especially with the luminaries, if a luminary is in its own decanate, it's maybe even more powerful than if a planet's in its own decanate because of that.
Sure. I think that's a very valid point, because there is no bound rulership for the luminaries. So yeah, I think this is as another thing that you mentioned about a decan is all about a particular nature of a planet, and also the sign in which the decan is actually being placed. So it is the analogies or stories that is being given for each decan in the texts like Yavana Jataka is actually really very descriptive of how a planet is going to manifest in a particular decan. So yeah,
let me see if I can find that real quick. The Yavana Jataka is it's one of the best ones for this. Yeah, here it is, the Drekanas. So like I don't know, we could just like
you can just talk about just one.
Yeah, I'll look at mine. You can share yours if you want, or you don't have to. But like, sure. I actually think that my birth time may need to be adjusted a little bit to be in the second decanate, because this does fit me better, but I'm not sure because mine's in the first one. A man born in the second decan of Virgo is form unassailable in battles, delights in fine arts, crafts, and storytelling, and travels to foreign countries. He's graceful and walks like the forest dwellers, a talkative petitioner. His words are listened to. And I just, that seems to describe me more than the first one. Okay. But who knows, right? Did you want to share yours, or?
Yeah, second decan of Taurus.
Of Taurus, okay. Okay, here it is. Do you want to read it?
No, please go on.
Okay. I'm born in the second decan as a handsome man with an auspicious body, a consumer who has great wealth and desires sexual intercourse, baths, and ornaments. A strong, intelligent person of a firm nature. A greedy man who is lucky with women and sexual intercourse.
Okay. Okay.
Well, yeah, anyway, so whether or not these are going to fit everyone exactly isn't really the point. The point is that we can learn a lot from these descriptions and also the images, which are found quite a bit earlier in this text, which are stuff like, you know, a man holding like a battle axe and, you know, grimacing, or they get strange. One is like a woman in a boat sailing across a river, you know, so they're kind of very poetic images. And these images and these descriptions here can be used, they can be very well used to get more out of something in a chart. You know, they can qualify things more. They're not primary meanings. They're not, you know, we don't need to look at them first and foremost, but they are things that will basically help us to fine tune what the chart may be saying. And so looking at the Decana for the ascendant and for the moon and for, you know, key factors like that can be useful in describing something about the person generally, about the way they think, about their character, about their talents, about their sort of path in life. And then you can see too, like, you know, here we'll just go back to my one. So like if this, you know, if this one is if this one were mine, let's say, which I think it is, because my birth time would need to be only, I think, a few minutes later to be this. And my birth time is like one of those exact birth times, like exactly 4 p.m. It's not really, you know, who knows how likely that is. So, but, you know, I might look and see unassailable in battles. Well, I might look and see how strong is the person's 8th house. You know, is he really unassailable in battles? And in my 8th house, I have an exalted sun. So that would kind of fit. You know, I've never really suffered because of battles with enemies growing up and stuff. I never really like lost anything because of that stuff. You know, delighting in fine arts and crafts and storytelling. Well, you want to look at planets like Mercury and Venus and see where they are and so on. And travels to foreign countries, you want to look at, you know, the 3rd and 9th houses and so on. And, you know, you could do like an inverse analysis if you wanted. You could take something like this and then just go read the description and look at the different factors that would make a person this way. So it's kind of an interesting way to approach it, you know, and it's similar to working with nakshatras, honestly, at this level.
Yeah,
you know?
sure.
And even the lords are similar, because with nakshatras, you can use planetary lords and you can do the same thing, although I don't think too many people do that. But yeah, so there's kind of they're sort of a fun thing to explore. I think on a technical level, it's easiest to just treat them very simply and look at the planetary lords of the Decans and that thing. But I think it's more fun to explore this slightly more poetic storytelling level of it. And that's where I think the Decans really start to come to life, because the Bounds don't have anything at all like this, you know? They don't have any sort of storytelling, mythological kind of narrative attached to them like the Decans do. So, so yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, sure. So did you want to just say about your YouTube channel, because I think we have not spoke about your YouTube channel, so.
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, I've just been doing a lot more videos on my YouTube channel, Lars Panaro's Heavenly Branches, Astrology and Tarot, and I have videos on the meanings of the 7 planets that I'm still working on as we make this. I've got, I think, 2 more planets to go, but there's a lot of information in those videos regarding some of the stuff we talked about here. And I just plan to keep doing more and more videos on all this kind of stuff, and maybe eventually have more concrete demonstrations of some of these techniques. And I'm also doing like monthly horoscopes with tarot cards for each sign of the zodiac, and I'm doing full moon and new moon readings as well on there. So yeah, check out my YouTube.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Please go ahead and subscribe and do all that stuff with Lars's channel, because he offers one of the most unique stuff on YouTube as an astrologist. So I think it'll be very valuable. Yeah, sure. So we'll get back with Bounds, and
okay.
yeah, Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.